Hello, this is Mike at GameFromScratch, and welcome back to another in the Closer Look at Game Engine series. The entire idea behind the Closer Look at series is to give you an idea. It's a combination of a review and a getting started tutorial on using various different game engines. So let's try to help you decide if a game engine is right for you, so you can spend an hour with me as opposed to spending a week or two trying to figure out if the tool matches what you want. I've done about a dozen or more of these. I'll link down below. There's also a text version of this, which will also be linked down below. So if you prefer to read over listening to me ramble on, that is an option for you. As you probably guessed by the scrolling graphic in the background, today what we're looking at is the Wave engine. The Wave engine is a free, with an asterisk, not open source, cross-platform, C# based game engine with tooling that runs on OS X, Linux, and Windows, and it's capable of targeting all of those, plus iOS, Android, and whatever the hell you call Windows Mobile these days. Do be aware up front, though, iOS and Android both require a Xamarin license if you want to deploy there. And now back to that asterisk comment. Wave Engine is 100% free. It's in version 2.0 something something. The only real requirement is that you have to display their splash screen on startup. I don't understand the business model of this company, and that always makes me a little wary, but it has been in development 4 or 5 years now, has been free that entire time. If you do want to remove that startup splash screen, you have to contact them, so money probably comes into play at that point. But if you're okay with the splash screen being shown, it's a completely free game engine. One thing people are going to say right up front is, what is this compared to Unity? And that's going to be the most common thing for every game engine ever made that is C# based. And it's a fair question. What this is, and was right up till probably 2.0, was a mostly code-focused editor. So a lot of people don't like the structure of Unity. Basically, it's tool-focused, and you kind of work around their programming model. This one is definitely code-focused, and the editor itself is actually rather new. And that's a bit of a double-edged sword, because some of it is a little rough, as we're going to see. But it is there. It's capable of creating entities, positioning them in your scenes, creating multiple scenes, and that's about it. So we'll jump all into that very, very shortly. But if you're more preferring a code focus over the path that Unity takes, you will like Wave Engine. On top of that, it's another entity component-based system that seems to be pretty much the standard these days. It uses reflection quite heavily to recreate your project, so your extensibility is actually quite simple. If you like working in C# code and then having an editor to complement that, you'll like the Wave Engine. If you don't, if you really like the Unity way of doing things, the Wave Engine is going to seem pretty basic and rough compared to it. So it's two different approaches, two different worlds, but easiest thing to do is probably just jump in and show you. So first thing, the Wave Editor install is very, very straightforward, so I'm not going to bother showing it. Basically, it's a one-click download. You install it using default, and it automatically updates itself. The only thing I ran into was some kind of a Visual Studio 2015 file format mismatch. If you search it, there's a fix on Stack Overflow, and I think only a small percentage of the community runs into it, so hopefully it won't be an issue for you. So here we are. This is actually a scene I've already created, but I'm going to just start from scratch. So when you create a new project, very straightforward. YouTube Demo 1. You name it. You give it a home. You pick the version of the editor to use. It automatically updates, so all the different options are available to you. It's not a very large package anyways, I'm well under a gig, I believe. You pick the platforms you wish to support. I'm going to stick with just Windows for now. But as you can see, you've got Mac OS, Linux, Android, iOS, Windows Phone, and Windows Store, or Windows Universal. Their branding's all a little confusing right now, so... but those are your primary platforms in existence today, so they're mostly all supported. But I'm just, again, to keep this simple, I'm just going to stick with just a Windows deploy. You can add them and change them after the fact. But otherwise, this is your standard editing environment. Now, purely optional, you can do everything 100% code if you want, but there is a lot of time-saving utility in using this editor, so I recommend you probably start with the editor unless you're really anti-editor, that is, because even with the words, it does make time savings quite a bit better. So your standard layout here, you got your 3D viewport. We'll come back to it in a second. Over here you have your asset hierarchy, which is pretty much the stuff that goes into making your game. This is where your scenes go, your textures go. You can have multiple scenes open. This represents the current scene, but you can easily create a new one. just asset, create scene, and we'll show up here in the scenes folder, or you have your assets. And really, that's kind of it. You can add new ones. A pretty consistent UI. Add something new is using this little plus icon in the top corner. So we can do a new and then create whatever you want. This was actually the same as this menu right here. So if you want to bring in a texture or a material, you could do it here. I'll show you that very quickly, actually. That's another editor we've got. So create a material. And there is a material editor that comes up. All right, why did my mouse just go wonky? Let's see. Okay, so here you've got standard material, dual material, or environmental materials, and then your standards. You basically set the alpha channel, the specular reflection on your surface, your diffuse, emissive, or ambient colors, or you apply textures to each of these different areas, light on or off, vertex coloring enabled, etc. So your texture generation is fairly simple. You've got different preview options to come in. So let's just create a simple, let's say, red texture. So diffuse, we'll pick red, and done, and create. So then you see now you have this material that you can use in your scene. Same works for bringing in sprite sheets, which we'll look at a little bit later in an actual example, or 3D models. 3D models they only support 2 file formats, and I had trouble with actually both of them. One is X, which is the old DirectX format. It used to be the only format they supported, but for some reason the one I brought in didn't work at all. And then the other format they support is FBX, which is pretty well established. That's let me see, that's not Collada. So FBX is film box format, which Autodesk basically co-opted, and they now use, Autodesk uses FBX format as their interchange format within their own product. So Maya, Max, Soft Image, the sculpting one, which name is not Mudbox, etc. I'll use FBX as a translation layer. So it's a very commonly supported thing from FBX, and I believe they also actually use Autodesk's library. So if you use Autodesk's tools, your results are going to be pretty easy, pretty straightforward. So if you're from an Autodesk background, only supporting FBX is not a big deal. If you're from a Blender background, however, expect to jump through more hoops. Now, this is one of those things that Blender and file exports has always been a fun thing to deal with, and this is no exception. But what I found, and I'll just show you very, very quickly here, I found when I was doing my export, there's a couple things I had to do because otherwise it just simply did not work. So we'll just do a standard cube here. I'll actually do the full thing, so we can actually see if it works here. So I'll just do a quick unwrap. So mark, 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 and mark. UV unwrap. Okay. So see if that actually worked. Unwrap. Oh, I forgot to actually mark them. All right, let's do that once more, and I'll actually do something at the end. So what we want to do is mark those scenes, select everything, and unwrap. All right, so there is an unwrapped cube. Let's toss a texture on it. We shall call the my texture just color grid. All right, so there's an unwrapped cube with a texture on it. Come over here, and we will see that it is seemingly not working. Let's get this out to the desktop. My texture, that works for me. Yeah, let me just see if that's a lighting issue. No, it's not. Why are you not? Image, see if you apply coordinates UV. Let's pick our UV map, and let's add our texture desktop, my texture. There you go. All right, so there is our cube with a texture map on it. And now when you do your export, very critical, and here's one of those things about Wave Engine you should be aware of right up front. Documentation, yeah, not great, especially for something like this. This is something you would expect to be incredibly well documented, bringing assets in. It's one of those struggling points, the pain points. I found nothing for Blender, nothing at all. And I think I only found even a hub. I never even found a document that explained which file formats are available. Like I found that just basically by scraping over time. So that was definitely a point of frustration. But what I did find is when I was bringing my FBX in, the 7.4 binary format did not work. Now this is probably not on Wave Engine. This is probably actually on Blender, but when I switched to 6.1 ASCII, it did work just fine. So let's go ahead and export FBX. Oh yeah, I'm already on the screen. Duh. All right, let's go back to ASCII. Switch to the desktop. Fine, I'm cool with export FBX. Untitled. Okay, so here we are. We're back in for assets. In our assets folder, go ahead and add one, and we want to import asset. Another oddity I found here was actually it allowed me to import assets. Like I tried Blender files to see if they were supported right off the hop, and then imported, and it just did absolutely nothing with it, which was very misleading and confusing. So do be aware of that. But this is how you bring an actual asset in. So we'll go ahead and so there is our box brought in. Ignore the fact that it actually ended up being a box. That's just a quirk of fate. And you should be able to instance it just by dragging it into the scene. At least that's what they say. So here we click, double click it, and you get a model viewer. But in this case, it didn't actually work. So again, this is one of those things that it says the editor says it can do, but in reality, it can't. But what we'll do now is go ahead and I'll show you what this side of the screen does by creating an entity that we can bring that 3D model in. Now, the base concept, everything that is in the world here, this is basically can be considered, this is your scene graph. These are the things that are available in it. Now you'll notice by default, it actually created a light and then a 2D and a 3D camera. Now you can switch between 2D and 3D at any time. So we're here in 3D right now. If we want to model in 2D instead, click that. So now you're in 2D mode, 3D mode, 2D mode, 3D mode. Okay, it's a very important button. But we're going to work in 3D for this particular example. So root of my scene selected. I'm just going to go ahead and I'm going to add a new entity to the scene. Now entities are just basically component containers. However, you've got some pre-made ones here. Like we could bring in a cone, like so. And now it's in our scene. You see you got your typical 3D world layout, your origin here, etc. You've got your widget for controlling your different axes, etc. And you'll see over here that your entity is actually composed of, we'd like to say components, but there's actually three different kinds of things. There's behaviors, there's components, and there are, I believe they're called drawables, which is basically renderers. So this entity is actually composed of a 3D transform, which is what gives this guy his position in space, a materials map, which is a collection of materials, which in turn will contain a material eventually, your model, the 3D model itself, which in this case is procedurally generated, and the model renderer. And if this was not there, this would not be visible. So you have to add your own renderer. So that's basically how it works. You create your entity, and you attach components to it. And I'll actually do it from scratch. So we got this cone in here. Now I want to go ahead and add our model instead. So plus, I will create an empty 3D entity right here. And let's give that guy a name, our model. So by default, you've automatically got your positioning information. So we're at the origin. You notice there's nothing rendered, nothing seen, nothing there. Next, what we want to do is we'll go ahead and add a component to our entity. So as I said, there are components, there are behaviors, and there are drawables. And what we want here is a component, and we want model. And now if I click here, I can pick, see, this is just infuriating. Why are you not populated? So there are so many little niggling annoyances in dealing with this editor that it drove me batty. And I don't know why this stuff happens. Let me just see if I actually delete it and recreate it, if it comes in. But like I said, this is an editor that needs a lot of work. And I just ran into things that would work one time and did not work the next time, and it got mildly, incredibly infuriating. All right. So there's our model. If I double click it, we can see that it's rendered like so. Okay, now there's even a, so maybe that's a good sign. So now let's grab our model and no assets. What the hell? One sec, I'm gonna try to do a reload and see if that brings the asset in. It's viewable. And not there. Well, at least you're getting to see the parts of this engine that, and we crashed. So there is a lot of work to be done, and it's little stupid niggling things that don't work, and you just witness it firsthand. And I don't even have an excuse for this because it doesn't seem like the kind of things that we should be blowing up on. But let's see now. No asset, and for some reason, right click, delete. I can't get rid of it. And crash. So, not the greatest part of the demonstration so far, but you are seeing the downside too. You know what? I'll leave it at that because watching it crash over and over again isn't fun. I'm actually just, in case I have a bad scene here, let's try it again. So, as I was saying, the editor needs work. It needs a layer of fit and finish for sure. And we're going to see there's a couple of other issues we're going to experience here. So once again, we got our camera. Here's our viewport. So it wasn't a really good demonstration, but you do make things by composing it of entities which have different behaviors. It shouldn't be crashing. It could be their FBX importer. I'm not sure why it's feeling that bad, but I have it a number of times where things that should populate in like in lists and drop-down lists like that haven't. I don't know the reasoning behind it. But you see here, you've got your typical 3D view, and unfortunately, there's only a single view, so there's no ability to go into like quad view or split view or anything like that. You do have a basic camera manipulator up here, so you can switch between the different perspectives. That icon here represents your camera. You can pan around, middle mouse button, scroll with this one, and dolly with the right. And that's about it. There's no orbit, unfortunately. Again, there are manipulators you can use to control your placement of items in the scene. However, another issue is the arrow at the end doesn't always work, and a lot of times it causes a scene, a non-selection of your scene. So it can be a little finicky using these widgets. For here, I can't click that blue one, for example. And then sometimes when you click the blue, it doesn't count, and you actually have to find on the line. So it can be a little finicky for sure. But here you can see this blue here is your camera's viewing frustum, and here is the ultimate, the rendering result. So let me just switch out so you see it's starting here, switch the near plane out to 0. Oops, that's a 9. 0, and you see it goes back right to the point of origin of the camera. And this is what ultimately is shown in your camera. So let's make a non-imported one. We'll go back and do it with a primitive again. So we'll bring in a primitive cube like so. Just very large, somewhat randomly positioned for reasons I don't know. Come on. And enter. All right, so now we have a cube at the origin. I select our camera. You can see in the preview that our cube is there. So let's position it slightly. And there we go. See how it selected off? So your view and your scene is composed of these things that if I add something to our cube, for example, a point light, why did you not parent? Okay, that should have parented, I thought. Ignore that then. So that is your simple scene hierarchy. You can add functionality, you can add new things to existing scenes, or we can, like, say here, change out. Do I not have a material? Oh no, sorry, I created a new scene. So let's go ahead, we'll create a material. Cube preview, because that's what we're going to stick it to. I could bring in a texture. I don't have any textures loaded or anything, so I'll just go with red. So now we come over here, default material path, we can pick our red material and apply it. So your basic hierarchy goes like this. Now I'll show you a little bit of how components can also work together too. So pick our 3D camera, and here again your preview. So what I can do is I could go ahead and add an entity to our component. And there's a bunch of them, like there's a whole lot. Lenses, sprites, billboard effects, behaviors, which we'll actually show one in a second, but you can do things like touch gestures, sound controls, and animations, etc. Or drawables. And these again are the renders, and if you do not have a renderer attached to your object, it won't be drawn, obviously. So what we're going to do here is we're actually going to add a film grain to our camera. So just film grain lens. So we're just going to add a new component, and you'll see a new selection opens up here. We can change the settings here, and you can see in the preview the film grain actually being added. So we can add maximum, a lot more grain, increase the size, decrease the size, etc. So that's how the components work. And ditto for behavior. So let me just select my cube, and I'll show you here again. So we'll add a new one. behavior, and we'll just add a spinner behavior to that. So now our cube has a spinner enable attached. Let's make it 5 about the y-axis. So now we can go ahead and run our scene. There's 2 ways to do this. We can do it a preview, which shows it in this window, or build and run, which will actually compile the code and make it go. Here we'll do a quick preview, and there you can see your film grain is applied to your camera, and your cube is spinning. So that's how the entities work and interact and intermingle with each other. Now, as you saw very, very, very clearly, this editor needs polish. There's too many crashes, too many things not working right, too many frustrations. The controls here are a little too yeah, and the lack of additional views is almost unforgivable. So there are definitely things they need to fix, but the basics are all here. So in time, this experience could definitely get better. But now let's go, and up until now, up until 2.0, this has been a very code-focused engine. So let's instead focus a little bit on the code today. So first, let's save our project, and all you have to do is open C+ C# solution. It's firing up Visual Studio now. It'll be Mono Development or whatever on, or Xamarin Studio on Linux or Mac, but on Windows. So here's your basic project as it creates. Over here, this is your bootstrap. This is pretty much just your basic application being created. And here's where your configurations happen. You can set your resolution, the way your app behaves, etc. But for the most part, this all code here is to draw and render your scene. So your game there, where's game? Game is, so basically this guy here is creating, setting up your window, and creating your game class, and calling the appropriate methods on game. So there's your render loop, there's your start, there's your stop. And that's kind of what this is for. So this is just a framework for your application. It's just a bootstrap. It'll change based on platform, etc. But that's what app basically is. And that's all that this project's here for. So unless you're actually changing things about, like, say, resolution or native stuff, you're probably not going to be in there very often. Instead, your code mostly consists over here. And first, here we saw it created your game. And then in the initialized, game's going ahead and creating a scene. Now, you can have multiple scenes, you can create multiple scenes, but this one is kicking off your scene by default, and that's really all it does. Your scene itself, all it's doing is loading itself from file, and this variable right here is actually just a string being defined in here. Now, this is a system-generated class by the editor, and basically as you create resources, they'll be referenceable here. And so that's sort of the relationship between the two entities. So on the one end, you kind of create and compose your scene. Your scene is ultimately generated as, where did that file name go? This file. As I add resources and materials and such, here, let me just show you that. So let's go assets. Let's create. Let's just add an asset. So asset, import asset. Yeah, we'll use him eventually, but so it's brought in a simple sprite, and we'll save that guy, and we head over to Visual Studio. Should have updated. So I have to. Should not have to reload it. All right, I just discovered you have to do, to get this to be regenerated, you have to do a build over here in the studio, which I went ahead and did. I also added a material based off our sprite, which I didn't have to do. I can just go ahead and actually delete that guy now. So we just have our sprite, we have our material, and I shall just go ahead and do a build here. I didn't think you had to do this part. So that kicks off the code generator, and then when you go over to your code, it's been updated, and now there you go. So what you're seeing is it creates references to each of the entities or assets that you're actually using, and some of them are in proprietary format, some are exactly what they were. But this is sort of the link between, so your assets folder, your scenes folder, your scenes folder. So that's the mapping between the two. But for the most part, they're just string references, and it's all actually done via this load call right here. It's mostly transparent to you. Now, let's actually look at the same process that we used earlier. Let's see what states are seen at right now. All right, I have a cube in it. Let's take this cube and let's say delete it. So now what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and actually create that cube using code. And it's a fairly straightforward, clean process. We shall do it in here, right below this load call. Generally, this wouldn't be where you would do things. I'll show you an example a little bit later on where I'm actually going to create a character sprite. You can see a little bit more how the game would actually work and how we can integrate back to the editor, but this is just going to show you a little bit of the coding experience. So, as I said earlier, everything is basically an entity. So let's create a new one. It helps to spell it right. Oh, here, let me just make that a little easier to read. All right. So, cube, and actually I'll state exactly the same as my text version. So again, there's a text version of this. All the source code we're entering right now is available on GameFromScratch, and I'll link available below. So don't worry too much if you're not keeping up on to my incredibly slow typing. So first thing is we created our entity. Now we're going to basically add the components we need to it. So first component we're going to add is a cube. So this returns a cube component. And done. Now, the nice thing about add component is it actually returns the entity so we can chain them. So now what we're going to do is add another component. So we've got our cube in there now. We need 3D positioning. IntelliSense, I do not like the way you're behaving. And we need a renderer. Otherwise, it will not show up, like you. And finally, we need a material. Like so. And we shall actually... What did I do over there? Oh, I created a material separate. All right, so you're going to see things slightly out of order here, because the only thing I'm not going to do inline, just to keep the code a little bit more legible, so I'm going to create a material. So after we create our entity, we are going to go ahead and create the material we are applying, and that is a standard material. And come on, figure it out. Resolve. There we go. All right, so adding our material. And it is a new standard material, color.red and default layer dot layers dot debug layer. Come on, IntelliSense, quit failing me. Dot opaque. All right, so we're making a solid red material. We are applying to the materials map right there. That's all right, I did things a little out of order. That was a bit confusing. So that's it. Our entity is now created. We can actually go ahead and update one of those components in the entity. Here, let me show you how. This is, by the way, what we're about to do is completely and utterly redundant because when you create a new transform, it's at 0, 0, and 0 anyways. But we're just going to go find the transform component of our entity and set it to that position just to show you how you find components. So entity, and we can do it find component like so, and we can do it by passing in a type. And the type is transform 3D, so it'll find the first transform 3D component attached. There is a parameter in there, and you can say bool for is exact type, or otherwise it will return derived types as well. And then we want to set the position of that is new vector 3 0f. Why do I have caps lock on? 0f 0f. Ta-da! All right, so all we did there was basically we went and found the first component of type transform 3D, set its position value to the origin. And now let's show you how. Here we paralleled them, but we can also add a component after the fact. So let's go ahead instead and go entity add component like so, and new spinner. So we're gonna have a spinny red cube again. What else did I do with this? Oh yeah, I guess I'll show you how you can actually update. So that spinner by default does nothing. So we need to set it to spin on an axis. So there's another way you can actually find your component as well. So let's get a reference to our spinner. So we're going to need a cast on this way of doing things. You can also do entity.find component. And in the first variable, or the first parameter, you pass in the type of component you're looking for. Now, I don't know why you would ever do this over this syntax. I actually find that a lot cleaner, but this is your option. And then once again, you can say if it needs to be an exact match or not. But those are the two ways you can find a component within an entity. And now that we have our component, we'll increase y. So we're going to spin by the y 5, which is going to actually be very, very fast. So that's it. We just created a cube component, added a red material to it, added a render to it so you can see, added a transform to it, set that transform to 0, 0, and 0, and finally we added a spinner as well as a behavior. So finally, now that all of that's done, we are going to use this global class called Entity Manager, and we are going to add our entity, like so. That's it. And keep in mind, we are in the create scene call, so after our scene is loaded, then we're going to go ahead with this code. And let's see how that works. Not well. This is an invalid operation. Cube is already contained. See, I deleted it. So it has a. They need to work on their asset. First off, let's get rid of that. That's going to be very annoying. They need to work on their asset management stuff. So what just happened there is I deleted the cube from here, but it's still left over somewhere out there. And that's frustrating. It's like when you add an asset here and then delete it and then try and add it again. It sometimes uses the old asset for no particular reason. So their asset management definitely needs some work. So we'll do this simple workaround and just give it a different name. And now let's see what our code does. So again, all of this comes down not to the code side of things, but to the editor side of things. That editor needs fixing. But here you can see our spinning cube created in code as opposed to in the editor. And if you look over here, once again, what are you doing, computer? Over here, you can see no cube. So that was entirely code generated, driven, pushed all that through, and ta-da. So now let's go on to a slightly more advanced demonstration that actually shows the integration back and forth between the editor and your code side of things. And to do so, I'm just going to start fresh. So we have a new project, new everything. So let me just fire up Wave Editor here. And this was actually going to be a 2D instead of a 3D so far. So far we've done all 3D. Right now we're going to show you some of the 2D work. So first things first, let's kick over into 2D mode. And File, New Project, YouTube, I don't know, what are we up to, 3, 4, 5, doesn't really matter. C:/temp, and build. All right, so we created a new project. It should, lost that, okay. So first thing we want to do is we actually want to create some sprites to actually use here. We're going to use a very, very simple animation. I'll link the sprite sheet I'm using in the bottom, but it was posted on Reddit Game Dev a couple days ago. It's a 2D aircraft sprite. I'm just playing around with them. Very, very, very simple animation. But what we're going to do here is go on in and create a new sprite sheet inside of our assets folder. So create a sprite sheet, and we will call this airplane, I guess. So, dun, dun, dun. And now you can compose it. Now, there's a couple options here. First off, you can actually bring in texture packer sprites from codeandweb.com. Very cool program. I've actually done a couple of tutorials on working with it if you want to search GameFromScratch, or you can use their sprite composition. So basically, we're creating a single file out of multiple sprites. So first thing, we need to add some sprites. Let's add sprite 1 through 3. So. Yes, and this is the name they will come in as. A bit of a warning, originally those were called 1, 2, and 3, and that's a bad idea, because they actually get the variable name 1, 2, and 3, which is completely invalid in C#, which, by the way, if any of the developers are listening, you've got a bug there. So make sure that your file name for your sprite that you're importing is also a C# compatible variable name. So these are brought in as like index is 0, 1, and 2, but the name is going to be S1, S2, and S3, and I'll show you that in a second. And this is a very simple animation. It's just the props turning, as you can see the preview right here. Now, let's go ahead and actually create that animation. So it's going to be called animation 0, works for me. So starts at frame 0, ends at frame 3, and we will run it at 8 frames per second, like so. Otherwise, I'm pretty content with all the defaults here. We'll just let it go ahead and build the sprite sheet for us. And okay, so that was it. That was creating a sprite sheet. So that's one of the areas where the tool definitely did a very good job. So now we got our sprite sheet. We're going to go ahead. Now, this time though, we're going to do nothing here. It's all going to be, at least initially, on the code side of things. So let's do a quick run, make sure that everything's generated for us. Now this is going to do absolutely nothing, but at least we know that our assets were generated. So now we go File, and then open our C# solution. And now we're going to go ahead and actually create a new behavior in code, 100% code. This is how you would potentially create your, well, in this case, it's going to be our main player, and we're just going to give the ability to move that sprite sheet left and right. But I'm going to show you how the relationship between the editor and code. So, useful exercise. Again, absolutely nothing of value in that guy for now, and actually nothing of value in this guy. So we're not doing anything. We're not changing our code at all. All we're actually doing is adding new code. So add a new item. C# class U, and we shall call this my player, like so. Okay, and we are going to need a bunch of usings that I'm just going to go ahead and paste in here because I am lazy like that. So a bunch of the Wave engine includes, as you start using these classes, you can also use the refactoring tools to automatically resolve those conflicts if you wished. But we are creating a class called myPlayer, and we are inheriting it from behavior, like so. Now, we're going to use some attributes here, and this is where the reflection is going to come in and the editor is going to use it. First off, we're telling them that this is a data contract. Now, we're going to go ahead and create our class, and we're going to actually require a bunch of components. We need a transform 3D. This is the same entities you saw in the editor, just in a code perspective. Ooh, I guess we need a transform 2D actually. Transform 2D, like so. We need a sprite atlas, which is that texture sheet we just created. We shall call the sprite atlas because I'm very original. We need an animation 2D, which I shall call, you can guess, animation 2D. And we need a sprite atlas renderer. Otherwise, you don't see anything. Guess what I'm calling it. There we go. Now, what we don't do here, though, is if we're going to create all of these in code, you don't need what I'm about to do. But what we're going to say is these need to be provided by, well, ultimately the developer. But we're going to go ahead and mark each one as a required component, like so. So heavy use of reflection, heavy use of attributes, but simple. If you saw my earlier tutorial on Paradox Engine, the actual attribute usage there is a lot more involved, a lot more complicated. You have to order things, etc. This is all you have to do. You now support the editor, so that's pretty impressive. Okay, so we're inside our class, and we need a constructor. Let's call it back to the base and name it like so, and open and close. And now we need to put each of those things into, all right, I'm doing something wrong here. Oh, sorry, not a very good constructor that way. Transform 2D equals null. Sprite atlas equals null. Animation 2D equals null. And finally, sprite atlas render equals new. Sprite atlas render. There's no parameters or anything to set there, so we might as well just go ahead and create one in code. That's just about it. I think I need to provide an initialize class, otherwise it gets mad. So override initialize, and yeah, it works for me. Okay, and so finally, we're actually going to put some logic in here. And this is where your game loop comes in. This method is called throughout the life cycle. I will show you via IntelliSense. So you've basically got it doesn't make any sense. Update. So this is the key guy. Update is called per frame, and this parameter tells you how long has elapsed since the last time it was called. So here we are going to handle the interactions with the keyboard. Yeah, that was really hard to come up with. Again, another global class. Here's called Wave Services. This provides a lot of the functionality of the Wave engine. And you'll see here, so you've got assets, cameras, etc. What we want now is input, like so, and keyboard state dot left. So basically, we're just pulling is the keyboard left key currently button state dot pressed. Yeah, I want pressed, not release. So, in simple terms, is the left key currently down? And if it is, transform.2d.x equals, minus equals, and then we'll do float casting of, so 100 pixels times, I don't know why that needed a cast. Okay, I don't think it does need a cast, actually. Game time dot total seconds. So basically, we are saying move it 100 frames per second. So we don't know how long has elapsed per frame, so we're turning it into fractions of 100 based on the amount of time that's elapsed, but we're moving in the x direction at 100 frames per second rate each time the key is down. That's basically what that logic says. And now that logic is nice and copy and pasteable for the right key. Oops. Okay. I do not know what you're doing. Let's go like that. All right, so this one we will go with right, and this one we will go with plus. Okay, so very, very, very simple class. It is a class that is composed of a transform component, an animation component, a sprite atlas component, and a renderer. That's it. So now we're going to head over to the, I'll do Control-Shift-B for a build, and we'll head back over. It says, it has been modified. Would you like to reload? Yes, I would. Okay, so now we're back in our normal scene. So I've come back here, and I'm going to create a new, I'm in 2D mode. I'm going to create a new empty entity, and we shall call this Super Player, like so. And we are going to go ahead and add a behavior to it. And our behavior is the one we just created. So that's it. So that is how you can tie the engine and the editor together. All nice and now you're going to notice there's nothing being shown yet, and that's because although it has all these different components, you need to go ahead and actually define them still. So we created our sprite atlas earlier, but we haven't actually assigned it. So come in here, we pick our sprite sheet, so there, bang, now we do have it assigned. And then we come over here to our animation, and you'll remember when we were in our sprite sheet, we created animation 0. Cancel out of there. Go over here. Why is there no animation? This is a bad demonstration when you fail. Let me try this one more time. So sprite sheet. Why are you not even there? And once again, the editor is letting us down. Let's see if we're getting our animation anyways. So let's grab him, drag him into the scene. Middle-ish. Come on. Oops, I just moved its pivot. Preview. I am not getting the animations. Why the hell am I not getting animations? When you up. Apply. Okay. Current all right, there it is. All right. So now we zoom in here and preview this guy. We should now see our props turning. Maybe it's run only. Not a great demonstration. But left keys, we move to the left. Right keys, we move to the right. Left keys, move to the left. Now I just need to figure out why that animation isn't working yet. Super player, sprite sheet, animation, current animation is animation 0, speed factor 1. Oh, play automatically. All right, that was 100% on me. Let's do a preview. Let's do a render. There. So now we have our very, very modest animation. Our left arrow, our right arrow, and done. So that's it. Obviously, we're at 45-minute mark. I can't go into a lot more depth with coding, but the strength of this engine is 100% on the code side. As you've seen, not so much on the editor side. And hopefully that's something that they fix in time. Now, if you stay 100% in code, a lot of what you saw here as negatives are no longer negatives, except for what we're about to jump on to the next part. So that's the coding experience. There's a whole lot more to this engine. It's a pretty comprehensive set of code. So most of what you want is in there somewhere. So now we move on to community and documentation. The community is smallish. There's actually a lot of people actually requesting that I make this video. So there's a lot of interest, it seems. But if we go over here, I'll go show you the forums. This is your primary source of information. Your post counts are, it's a moderately active thing. It's been around for a while. There are people that are showing interest in it. There are questions asked. Sadly, a lot of times when I was actually looking for an answer, I would Google it, I would find a post on the forum, and I would see a question looking for the same problem I had. Just no answer, which again is very frustrating. But there is a community out here. Let's see how much activity there was, for example. Yeah, so nothing today, 2 posts yesterday. So it's not extremely active by any means, but it's not really, really lacking either. They've also got a blog, which has a somewhat random, okay, that's a dead link. Where the heck to go? It's available here from Learns, but they actually have a blog full of posts. Ignore that for a second, because that's actually where we're going to come back and things are going to get a little bit better. But now we're going to talk about their documentation. So if I click plus publications here, this brings you to their blog. Their blog has a mishmash of technical posts on using it. So there was some interesting stuff I actually found in there, so it is worth checking out. But primarily they have their API reference and their documentation. And at first glance, these are both very good. At first glance. So here we are at the documentation. You can see down the right-hand side, they've got a pretty good selection of topics covered. Getting started on your various platforms, the overall way things work, 3D graphics, loading a primitive, loading from model from file. So here's the extent of your FBX documentation. And it's basically, here's where you bring it in. There's absolutely nothing in there about file formats, exporting from your DCC tool, etc. So that part's kind of, basically, it tells you how to do file open asset, which is pretty close to useless. However, where the documentation starts getting really crappy is when you start going, okay, joint between 2 sprites. And, oh, actually, that one happens to be there. Tick. All right, why am I getting, yeah, there's a lot of this, about 50%. So about 50% of your links down this side are stubs that lead you to under construction. And some of the stuff is actually pretty critical stuff. So this is sort of your manual getting started information, and there's a lot of holes. And some of these holes are in things that you would think would be pretty obviously documented. And then when things are documented, they're documented too lightly. Now we're going to carry this over a little bit when we're talking about the API reference as well. So let's bring up the API reference. And at first glance, wow, this is what you need. And to be honest, as an experienced developer, this is more important to me than anything else. If there's good reference documentation, screw the rest of it. I can figure it out on my own. So if the purpose of a class is documented and the reasons and the instructions behind the parameters are well documented, excellent, perfect. So you can see, nice generated class reference gives you an idea of what the entire library and framework is capable of. And I recommend you come in here just to get a better idea of what scope of code that Wave Engine actually provides from an API level. And this does give you a good idea. Now let's come in and say, for example, go to a camera. And here's your documentation. So let's bring up, say, free camera 3D. Nothing. There's no description of anything at all. Fixed camera, nothing. No explanation of why this is here, no explanation of the members. So here's all your members for there's the extent of what you got. So basically, if you've got a variable that, for example, let's say far plane, gets or sets the far plane. Well, I happen to know what the far plane is, but do you? And does this variable description help you in any way whatsoever? And this is about the extent of the documentation available. So there is no explanation of what classes do, why they exist, etc. The documentation is a huge letdown, and this is point blank something Wave Engine needs to focus on, because this is just stupid, like pure stupidity, to have this generated reference but not take the time to do the markup in your code that generates the actual content. So this is just lazy, this is BS, and this is terrible. So on the level of the reference documentation, it borders on useless. This you can get entirely through IntelliSense inside of your. There's no reason to come here at all. So if you've got a decent compiler, your IntelliSense is giving you everything you can see here. Pointless, useless stupidity. So the reference side of things, they screwed up like you wouldn't believe, and this is something that needs addressing. And I would not even consider using this engine until that is addressed, personally. But again, personal pet peeve, reference is incredibly important to me. Reference is the most important piece of documentation, in my opinion, and that might as well not exist. So big drawdown there. However, we do get into the game starter kits, and this is kind of nice because this is where you will do your learning, especially because the manual sucks. So you've got the starter kits, and they're hosted GitHub samples. So basically, I'll go back a level here. Wave Engine has a pretty good selection of code available on the documentation we were just in there, but you've got these quick starts and your samples that would these are how you're going to learn. Also, a number of the components that we saw are available in source as well. So your animation, your cameras, blah 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 blah, all those components have source available. So it's not a open source engine, but pieces of it are, and you can definitely use that as a learning experience. But let's go back into our samples. So here you can see there are samples for just about every code thing you need to learn. So if you wanted to learn about transitions, come on in here and go to main, and then yeah. So in this case, actually, I think most of it's going to actually be in the scene. So it's got 15 scenes that are generated. So you're going to probably want to learn via the samples. This is where the guts are. And there are a lot of samples. So that part they did right. That part is definitely better for sure. But the documentation is not. So your learning is going to be done by browsing code. If you're the type that likes browsing code example projects, the documentation isn't as big of a flaw, although that reference material is. That reference material is unexcusably bad and needs to be fixed. But this is how you will learn to use Wave Engine, period. So if that's off-putting to you, well, you're going to be put off. If you like working, getting your hands dirty with code examples, etc., they've got that covered pretty well. So basically, in a nutshell, that's it. That's Wave Engine. My summary would be, from a code perspective, it's a nice, clean design. Like the way things work, the way things are coded, the way you actually work with things is well done. The way you tie back to the editor, it's pretty seamless. So you can actually expose something back to the editor in a very clean manner, as we just saw earlier. Just a couple of attributes, and reflection takes care of the rest. So that part's very, very nice. The component system works well. The components that are provided are fairly comprehensive. You get a good set there. The platforms supported are pretty broad. The code, from what I've seen, is pretty clean. It's just let down by the other areas. The Wave Engine editor is new, and as you saw in this brief demo, frustrating. Hopefully, now a lot of what you saw there that didn't work, that was flawed and broken, is also low-hanging fruit. This is the kind of stuff that they can actually fix fairly simple. It's a big to-do list, but it's fairly small items on that list. So hopefully we actually will see some rapid improvements for the Wave Editor. The Wave Editor itself hasn't been out that long. So you got to give them some time to get things right. I wouldn't rely on it right now, per se. But as I said earlier, if you're a code person, you don't really need the editor. The editor is a new addition. You can do it all in code. And that's a good thing, because the editor is just not ready yet. Now, again, I would say hands down, the biggest flaw with this engine is that reference material. That is something that it's just bad and needs to be fixed. But otherwise, the kernel here, the core, the guts of it, if you're looking to go mobile, looking cross-platform, and you want an alternative to Unity, this definitely is one, and it's an easier to use alternative in my opinion than Paradox, but it's also not as mature. So that visual environment needs to come along, and that reference needs to be set. So that's it for today. I hope you enjoyed that. Once again, all the links will be down below to the Game from Scratch text equivalent. Also, Game from Scratch is on Patreon, so if you like this video and videos like it, please consider supporting us on Patreon. Definitely be appreciated. That's it for now. See you later. Goodbye.